Hi, everybody. I know a lot of you in the room, and I'm so happy to see so many of you. Welcome to the first session of the Practice Career Speaker Series. This speaker series is focused on epidemiology and program evaluation, and this is the first of several sessions that I will tell you about as soon as I figure out how to. Okay. So the speaker series is a series of panels or single speakers who have PhDs who are working in public health practice. And they've been invited to describe their educational path and what careers they've had along their path to where they are now, and to describe their current work, so that we hear a lot about academia in academia, and the people we're learning from whom we're learning are in careers in academia. So this is an opportunity to really hear about what other folks are doing with their public health degrees. So we have Lara Vaz and Kate Gilroy, who I will introduce more properly in a moment today. And then we have a dear friend of mine, Gabrielle Brueggelmans, who's from the Center for Epidemic Preparedness out of Europe. Currently the Netherlands is where she is, on April 6th. And on May 3rd, we have Carly Williams from CDC and UCAM, did I say that right? Lamb from the New School in New York. And we haven't landed on the September date. We're going to take a break for the summer. And then we haven't landed on the exact date in September, but we'll have Peter Hansen probably the second week of September. And from there, we're still recruiting folks to come and talk to us. So if anyone in the room after this session has somebody they're dying to hear from on either the evaluation or the epi side, knowing that there are intersections between those things, feel free to let me know. So the purpose is so that you have exposure to professionals with PhDs who work in epi and evaluation practice careers, so that you can make informed choices about what to do if you're thinking about non-academia going forward. And the audience, everyone in here is welcome. Here are the audiences we're focusing on. I am the lead of this seminar series. I'm leading with Emily Gurley, who you all may know from the illustrious contact tracing course and other accomplishments. I'm in the International Health Department, and I have a joint appointment in EPI, and Emily Gurley and I lead the Surveillance Outbreak Response Team, which is interdepartmental, and we have some members here today. And that group really does focus on doing practice work within the academic setting. If there are any doctoral students who are interested in that, you can come see Stephen or Emma or myself afterwards. We work with health departments to do analysis with and for them, and to help them with outbreak investigations and lots of other things. We're funded by the Vice Provost for all of the food that I hope you'll stay around for afterwards, with a little bit of additional funding from the International Health Department. And I've listed some of the people who've helped to put this together at the end here under support, just to acknowledge them. And so without further ado, I am going to introduce our speakers in the opposite order in which they will present. Kate Gilroy, who's raising her hand right now. I think didn't you want to face the? No, okay, you didn't. Okay. No problem. No problem. Kate has a PhD and a SCM. We just realized that she started the PhD as I was exiting in infectious disease epi. And she's an epidemiologist with 20 years experience in developing and implementing complex applied M&E and research in public health practice. She focuses on community and child health programs and is currently a senior technical advisor in MEL, Measurement, Evaluation, and Learning at JSI, John Snow, Inc., and works on the Momentum Project and the part of it called Momentum Knowledge Accelerator, and in the integrated health resilience aspect of the Momentum Project and on other projects. She previously worked with a child health team at the USAID Maternal and Child Health Program, MCSP, and supported teams in many places around the world to better monitor, evaluate, and implement programs in maternal child health. And prior to joining that project, she worked for IntraHealth, supporting M&E again, in many, many places I can barely even get to because she's worked all over the world. She's worked in health system strengthening, workforce development, service delivery. And before that, she was here as a scientist. And before that as a student. And she worked in the Institute for International Programs, teaching the LSEE course. So we're like passing batons over the years without ever having met. And she was a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala, working in sustainable agriculture many moons ago. And she speaks French and Spanish. And so that's the intro of Kate. And then I'm going to introduce Lara, and then I'll have them both get up and stand in front of you. Lara, I know from, I'm not sure where we were when we met. Yeah, but we also met in far-flung places like Geneva and other locations. And she has been a senior program director in the international program for the Population Reference Bureau since March 2020. Auspicious timing, Lara. Is that right? Yeah, yeah. You just chose exactly COVID to change jobs, right? When she took on the role of the technical director for the USAID Momentum Knowledge Accelerator Project. Which is a huge project serving programs around the world. She has more than 25 years experience with public health program planning, implementation, research, and monitoring evaluation in the US and globally, including PEPFAR and maternal and newborn child health programs. She's worked in NGOs, academic institutions, UN agencies. She sits on lots of working groups, international working groups and advisory boards. And she has a PhD in health behavior and health education from UNC in Chapel Hill and a master's of science in health policy and management from Harvard School of Public Health. And so with that, I think we'll hear more about how people got where they are. Those of you who've been in LSEE and have heard about people's paths towards their careers, you'll guess that people take circuitous routes, and they may, and serendipity sometimes plays a part in where people end up. And I'm sure that's no different than our invited speakers. So come on up. I'm going to ask, you can, Lara is going to start. Wait, am I supposed to say something else? Okay. Our agenda for today is each speaker will talk for about 10 to 15 minutes. Lara has a few slides. And then actually, I'm going to ask you all to ask some questions first. And then I don't think you'll be quiet, but if there are some topics not covered that I thought should be covered, I will pose some from my side. And then please stay for the reception. Now I need to get the other slides up, and then we can start. Here we go.
Look at that. I'm gonna pick my mouse.
Oh, Nice work.
Anyways, while we're doing this, hey everyone, I am, as Melissa said, trained in health behavior. My master's is actually in health policy and management. My minor in my PhD program was in epi, and particularly in infectious disease epi, which was great when COVID hit, because I was in the midst of like thinking about motivators, behaviors, and practices, and feeling a bit of PTSD from having spent 18 years in the HIV world and seeing us in some ways repeat some of the mistakes we made early in the HIV pandemic response, in COVID response. But I'm gonna talk a bit today. Can you hear me okay? I don't like wearing microphones, so.
But also for the recording.
Oh, for the recording.
Can I strap it on so you don't even notice?
Yeah, you can strap it on. So I don't even notice, even though I will notice,
No, no,
because I can feel it.
Nobody will know. I'm gonna just be a little bit bold here and we know each other.
We
right?
know each other, but maybe not that way.
Okay, now you don't even
Yeah.
know.
So anyways, I'm gonna talk a bit about sort of reflections and lessons on my career path, and el camino se hace al andar. Your path is made by walking in it, and certainly that was how I emerged into where I am today, and I'm not quite sure where I'm going from here. So there's a bit of that. So a little bit about me now. As Melissa mentioned, I'm currently the technical director for Momentum Knowledge Accelerator. Momentum is actually a USAID funded suite of awards that represent the USAID's flagship $800 million investment in maternal, newborn, child health, family planning, reproductive health. My position within PRB, or the Population Reference Bureau, is as Senior Program Director. I'm supposed to be doing work outside of Momentum right now, but Momentum is a little rather overwhelming, and so I get to dabble my foot in and out of PRB. As Melissa said, I also had the auspicious start of my time at PRB on March 2nd of 2020. March 12th, we went into lockdown. And so I spent a total of 4 days in the office before we went into lockdown, and never really got to meet people within a staff of 60. So I'm now becoming more familiar with everything that PRB does. And PRB has been around for nearly 100 years doing work tied to census and data use for family planning and advocacy purposes internationally. I'm actually adjunct faculty with UNC Chapel Hill, which is where I got my PhD. I used to be a research associate at Hopkins, but that expired in 2020, and just pandemic, I have not renewed that. I work in monitoring and evaluation and improving metrics, but really thinking about it from an implementation partner perspective, and really got into this because I was working on the implementation side and wanted to be able to have better evidence about program effectiveness. So less from the hardcore research side, and really from like an implementation side. Mentioned the behavioral science perspective. I pretty much will take anything from policy down to like a community level intervention and say that's all involves behaviors, because we work in health, and that working in human health involves working with people, whether it's a provider or a person or a policymaker. So we need to take into account the social scientists. Spent 18 years in the HIV world, starting off when we actually early enough that where the focus was prevention and not treatment. And so it went from prevention to treatment to retention and adherence. Spent a considerable amount of time in pediatric HIV and then the interactions between TB and HIV before jumping about 10 years ago into newborn health, which is kind of where I sit now, but not really. On the other side, where are my origins? I'm a social activist. I I'm kind of a rabble rouser, and so it's like, but why? I seem to channel my younger niece, who is really good at stomping her foot and saying that's not fair. And I think that that's a bit of me, and that's probably how I ended up in public health. Global citizen, I'll explain a little bit more about that. A mentor, and this is part of the reason I really enjoy coming to teach. And I really do also really enjoy working in teams and working with people to really sort of think about how do we expand our skill sets and how do we work towards common goals. And then finally, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, and I'm a dancer, but not going to do any of that today. More around the global citizen, I'm a US born child of immigrants. And I think I'm seeing nods. I think quite a few of us have dabbled in that space. I'm a first generation, I'm the eldest child. That explains a lot of why bossy me. I got a very early taste of the world. My dad was the first of his family to graduate from high school, therefore also graduate from college, first to graduate with a master's and a PhD. His father graduated primary school at the age of 32. So it's really shaped who I am. At the age of 3+, we moved back to India. My family, and then from there, I was in and out of the US and lived in 4 different countries before I hit the age of 12. So my perspective is always, I feel like my early perspectives have been global and been the insider as well as the outsider. And I think that's really important as researchers to sort of recognize that and sort of ground truth our experiences, and then solidly lower middle income class. So recognizing opportunities, but also the privileges that come with that. As an undergraduate, I went in thinking that I was going to be actually a genetic engineer, except that I hated physics. And so very early on, when it was like, oh, now it's time to take organic chemistry, integral calculus, and physics along with my prereqs, I was like, yeah, you know what? Physics is going to drop. I dropped the engineering part, but then continue to explore the majors. So strong interest in history, strong interest in anthropology, strong interest in biology, and in the social sciences. I ended up as a major in international relations, sort of looking at the interplay between health and development. And that's important. I stumbled upon that. It was the international relations major was a program. It was interdisciplinary, and I actually got to tailor that to really think about what is influencing health and where does development fit in that. Part 1 of grad school was, as Melissa mentioned, at Harvard in health policy and management, but in the international health program. So I had a foot both on domestic policy and management, as well as all of the international courses. People didn't know which department I was in, and depending who I talked to, they thought I was in the other department. That foot in both worlds is something that is reflective of both like growing up in multiple spaces, but the entirety of my career, and I'll continue on that. I finished my master's, and even though I was thinking internationally, worked locally. So what's local is global, what's global is local. I worked like Kate, in the East Bay, in Northern California, in Oakland, California. How many of you have heard of Oakland? How many of you have seen or heard of the movie Fruitvale? I worked off of the Fruitvale BART station in a solidly lower, I would actually say low income neighborhood for a community health center that was established by student health activists coming out of the La Raza student activist movement, the Chicano health movement, to serve populations that were being underserved by the public health system. And so was doing work first as a program planner and in writing proposals and in helping identify underserved medical areas, medically underserved areas. But then because of the success of developing proposals, actually got to implement and manage them. And so that was sort of my entry point into health education. And so was managing a large portfolio of health education programs, both clinical and community-based. From Fruitvale Avenue, I left for Geneva. Okay, and went from chickens on the side of the street in inner city Oakland to the halls of WHO, where I was looking at the evidence of effectiveness of interventions as part of the Commission on Macroeconomics and Health. So I spent 2 years at WHO looking at evidence of effectiveness of interventions, got a really amazing opportunity to be at WHO as its HIV department was reborn because UNAIDS had been established and there had been an exit of all of the HIV folks into UNAIDS. WHO had not really committed to working on AIDS at that time. And in 2000, they recommitted, came back in. That was the time I met Neff Walker. So that's the name dropping there. So Neff met me as a 29-year-old, more or less. And I got to really know and understand how global level policy and global evidence was reviewed. At that point, I realized I was seeing what was working in communities and then seeing what was counted as evidence because of study design and analytics, and said, I need to go back. And so after having danced in my professor's office 6 years prior and saying, I'm never going back to school again, I ate my words and went back to a PhD program, having gotten into Hopkins, but then deciding to go to North Carolina instead, where I got to work with Suzanne Maman, who is now Dean of Global Health in Chapel Hill, but is also a Hopkins alum. Probably a contemporary of yours, Melissa, right?
Yeah.
So that was grad school part 2. There, I was in the health behavior department because I was strongly committed to community participatory research, really better understanding what drives behaviors and how do we better evaluate behavior change programs. But I was working with faculty in the EPI department. So again, foot in both worlds. Dissertation work in Kinshasa during election times around pediatric HIV, lots of stories to tell you about that. Finished grad school. While I was in grad school, was doing some consulting because I could, and it was a good opportunity to maintain, but also maintain relationships, cultivate new ones, and supplement my income, which is always important as a grad student. And when I finished, moved to DC to work for FHI, now known as FHI 360, but at that time they were still FHI. Loved it, hated it, moved to Mozambique, spent 2.5 years in Mozambique working on PEPFAR programs as faculty, but also NGO staff. So I had a faculty appointment with Vanderbilt and the Institute of Global Health and the preventive medicine department. That was basically my day and night job, was being the monitoring and evaluation director for a $50 million PEPFAR program running mostly care and treatment programs. And then decided that I actually enjoyed sleep And so moved back to the DC area 10 years ago, where I was working with Save the Children, stepped out of HIV at that point into newborn health and the Saving Newborn Lives program, which was Gates funded. And that's important because it's different kinds of donors. And 3 years ago, moved to PRB. So I've talked about this. I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but as you can see, I've like a bunch of different positions. Sometimes these are overlapping and concurrent. So I was a research assistant and a consultant. I was a mill director and a research assistant professor. So these were like concurrent positions. I'm a senior program director and a technical director right now. But I've really run the gamut from community-based organization to international NGO to UN organization to small NGO to academia and different kinds of academic environments. So in summary, how did it get here? A lot of it was the major hopping and really getting exposed to opportunities and different ways of thinking. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I kind of figured out what I didn't want to do, and that helped me to pivot. I asked a lot of questions, and especially when I landed in North Carolina, the first thing I did was look up every single faculty member who was touching upon something related to international health, and I knocked on doors, and I was just like, "Hi, I want to know what you're doing. Let me ask you bunches of questions." Lots of leaps of faith. Moving from Oakland to Geneva was a huge leap of faith, and I did that in a month. Lots of opportunities and lots of luck in terms of who I met and then the time that I met them. Mistakes. We all make mistakes, but mistakes are opportunities for growth. And yeah, hard work. You know, it's like these things don't come easily. We do recognize that. Even with luck, you've got to figure out what needs to go next. The things in common it's the biology, it's the love of learning, it's a really strong sense of right. Really the curiosity that goes on with trying to understand what it is that we do and why we're doing it. And I think as an evaluator, that's really important. Well, is it working? Why is it working? How is it working? For what reasons is it working? How could it work better? You know, so these are all questions as an applied researcher that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. How do we know that it could work better, and why not? You know, why do you think this is going to lead to that? Which leads back to evidence generation and measurement. So big picture reflections. The world I stepped into as a 20-some-year-old in public health is a really different world now. I think we are, you know, yes, what is local is global and what is global is local, but we are talking a lot about, more so about inequities than we ever have, and about what's right and what's not right, and gee, what opportunities do I have, and am I the right person for this position? So really thinking about, you know, should we be talking ourselves out of a job, and really what does that mean?
Talking or working ourselves.
Both, right? The idea that we work in nonprofits, and a lot of us do that work, but there's sometimes this sense that working in a nonprofit means that things ought to be cheap. And the unspoken assumptions about what nonprofit work is versus the reality of it. There's a confluence of contexts and that implication of what contexts are and how those contexts are changing on the work that we do. There's a growing diversity of players. So back when we started, there were, you know, you can name like 5 organizations that are doing work in global health. And now, like every day, I'm stumbling across new organizations, better organizations, and that's a good thing. And strong conversations around decolonizing global health. And I would push us to really think about what that really truly means, and the paradigm shifts that need to happen around that. And I think that's it. Some good read.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can see the questions burning. Jot them down or bank them in your data bank. And we'll have Kate talk for a little while and then we'll ask some questions. And Kate's gonna talk about, I'm gonna get rid of the slides and
Yeah.
start.
Pass this. Yes, I can.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So yeah, sorry I didn't prepare slides. It felt weird, but Laura did such a nice job. So I'm gonna say everything Laura said, except I'm not a dancer and I haven't worked at all those places, or maybe made that many moves. So yeah, I'm gonna just kind of go in chronological order and, we'll figure it out from there and probably be a little bit shorter because I think Laura raises some great points and I don't know if we said in the beginning, we work quite closely together. I'm at JSI, but we're in these in these projects, we call them awards, but they're projects. And so we work quite closely together. And that's one nice thing about working in the NGO sector. There are a lot of consortiums and you get different points of view. So I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, actually working class. I worked my way through college and construction. So I think that sometimes, provides a different context, or there are a lot of kind of elites in our field, let's be honest, right? And so went off to college, and I didn't think I was ever gonna leave Pennsylvania, right? I look back and I have postcards from every single place I went, and just, to Melissa's point, I've traveled a lot of places, mostly in Africa. I'm an Africa girl. And so, I thought I would never leave, and now this is a nice, get the opportunities to travel. Even recently, I was on 4 different, including the States, I was on 4 different continents this past fall. So sometimes it's a little bit too much. So then I went to college for biology and chemistry and thought I wanted to be pre-med, and I did like physics, but the professor was cute too. So, and so, went to college for bio and thought I was going to be pre-med. And I kind of didn't, no offense to any of MDs that we have here or online, but I didn't like my cohort that were going to medical school. I just didn't I'm like, I want to hang out with these people for the rest of my life. And was lucky enough to have a couple of professors who did some public health. And I'm like, that's cool. And parasitology and all the icky bugs and all that stuff. I just was fascinated. And so went off to Peace Corps to work in sustainable agriculture, actually, management of integrated pest management. It is in English. So more or less built compost piles and did weird stuff out in the, not in the bushes, but in the hills and, in the campo of Guatemala. Got back, got a job in agriculture in San Francisco. I lived between Berkeley and Oakland, and I was more or less the fruit police. I went around to the ethnic markets in San Francisco to make sure that there weren't illegal fruit. Not pertinent to this, but you wouldn't know, but some fruits that used to be, they were worth almost more than drugs, and people would smuggle them in because of certain folks, certain ethnicities or certain cultural backgrounds. There's a lot of value in fruit. So I worked for the fruit police for it's the San Francisco City and the City Department of Agriculture. I did that for about a year and a half, had my badge, everything. It was the easiest job I could ever have. It was government and union, but it wasn't very fulfilling or well paid. So applied here and sat in this same room for many hours in the infectious disease epi program. And so, and I didn't choose that, back to opportunities or mistakes or, whatever. I was like, this looks like it might be a little bit more scientific or up my alley. And so, chose that and sat here and did my master's, which in the Department of Epidemiology, but worked with Peter Winch. So I worked quite closely with Peter Winch on some integrated management of childhood illness stuff that was just coming out. I'm dating myself back in those days. And so had some data from Mali and then through some life circumstances, stayed for my PhD. I actually didn't want to stay, but it turned out that I did, and that was an okay plan B, I think. And so, God bless Peter Winch. He sent me, and so I had spoken Spanish in Guatemala. Peter Winch sent me out to run programs with Save the Children or some evaluations and stuff with the Spanish to French dictionary out in the bushes of Mali. So if I wanted to eat or run and I learned how to say sampling proportional of size before I could say, can I have a fork in French, right? And so worked out in Mali. I did some of my classes and stuff and then went out to Mali to work on my PhD or work on Peter stuff and then eventually got to my PhD. And so, and that was in child health. And so I came in and I mean, this knocking on doors, like I came in and I really liked malaria. I wanted to work in like infectious disease epidemiology. And back in the day here at Hopkins, at least, it was mostly the folks it was much more molecular, much more of the lab bench science doing malaria and much less. And, this was in the early 2000s. And so there was a ton of money in HIV and not much in child health or malaria, at least around these hallways. So Peter was doing the child health, which had malaria. And so, kind of went with that and that was close enough. And then ended up there wasn't funding. And so I ended up doing childhood diarrhea because zinc was just coming out, again, dating myself. But so yeah, worked in Mali, lived in Mali on and off, I'd come back to defend my, or whatever, all those steps and hoops you have to take. I'd come back from Mali to come here and do that and then go back to Mali and live for 3 or 4 or 5 months and then come back for a couple of weeks. Working with a Save the Children project, we had funding from USAID and from WHO. And did my thesis, did my dissertation on child health in Mali and then was lucky enough to be invited to join the Institute for International Programs just when it was starting. So worked with all those folks and some of them, most of them I think are still here. I even predated Agbesi at the IAP, but then left. And so then, went out and did an evaluation in West Africa called the Accelerating Child Survival. Anyway, did an evaluation out in all different places in West Africa. And then, this is not an easy place to be faculty. So then kind of burn out a little bit and then went to the NGO sector and worked for IntraHealth, which was just a grab bag of everything and kind of a transition, and then did land at JSI with the maternal child and survival program and on their child health team, which, after all those years with Peter and working in child health and at IAP, I did, some global stuff or, those sorts of things. And it was really focused on child at that point, because there was the 2003, there was like kind of in 2003, a bunch of folks, Bob and all the other folks wrote, and Cesar and all those folks wrote, so series of papers in the Lancet to really kind of push the child survival agenda. And so there was more money then in the child health area when I was here at Hopkins, but then I was lucky enough to go to JSI where I was working with a team of child health programming folks, but I was the M&E and learning. And we say learning, some of it's research, some of it's documentation, some of it's implementation, it runs the gambit from, it's evidence. Sometimes it's better evidence than others, but that learning kind of the MEL, the learning is, is a grab bag for everything. And so, I've been at JSI for 6 or 7 years now and joined the Momentum program, we joined, you write these grants and you either win or you lose. And then if you win, you get to keep your job. And so was lucky enough to, join the Momentum Knowledge Accelerator, which is a bit of a different beast in the fact that it's more, how to say it? We don't have country programs. So we actually work with the projects that do have country programs. But then about a year and a half ago, I was asked to join Momentum Integrated Health Resilience, which is a project that works in fragile settings to backstop Niger. So work in Niger because, my heart is in West Africa always. And so, so work on that project, backstopping. And so I just, and that's kind of where I am now. But, within an NGO, we work on all different things. And so, I think there was a question that Melissa asked us, about what we do on a daily basis. And so,
Phone calls.
yeah, but start out the day with often a phone call to Niger to their, there's a team or a guy that I work with there. I mean, the main guy that is, have a call 3 out of 5 days with him on Niger stuff. And then, I work a lot on data. I'm also a metrics and measurement are kind of my area, especially in child health. But, at an NGO too, I think there's much, compared to academia, they're often looking more for generalists than specialists. So, it's not just child health, it's family planning, it's maternal and newborn. I mean, but you can phone a friend. So anytime there's a newborn question, I ping Lara on Skype or, those sorts of things. But oftentimes it is a more general kind of portfolio. And so, I mean, depending on what position you have and what project it is, I mean, certainly they're HIV specific or malaria specific. I think RMNCH reproductive, whatever that stands for, it is broader. And so there are, often people are just a specialist in that, even though it's all these different areas kind of combined together. And within this, and I think we're lucky, Laura, kind of, because within these USAID global mechanisms or whatever you want to call them, like we get to sometimes play with the big kids is what I call it, and go if we're invited, or Laura's invited more than me, but like go to the, or, does that stuff more than I do, but, go and work with WHO on new metrics for life course quality of care, or, I'm the co-chair of the, not on my LinkedIn, but co-chair of the M&E subgroup for the child health task force. So working on like some child survival indicators or frameworks and those sorts of things currently. And then certainly like just the program work, we have a health facility assessment in Niger. So it was up to later than I'd like to admit at this stage in my life on reviewing something that needed to go into an IRB for a Niger piece of work this week. And, and a lot of times too, it's, collaborating, trying to read what USAID wants sometimes, as well as, I do work with junior colleagues and, it's not necessarily at JSI, at least it's not official mentorship, but like working with teams and asking or working with teams and then trying to get that mentorship in or asking people to do stuff and then working with them to do it better and those sorts of things. And so I think, and the thing is, it's a different day every day. Like, it just depends. It depends. And there on these projects, even within these projects, there are a bunch of different work streams. And so it's just trying to keep all the balls in the air and looking at the ones that have fallen on the floor and trying to figure out how to pick them up, I think. But, that's kind of, I think that's kind of the trajectory. I'm looking to see if I missed anything. Yeah, we can go to questions.
Thank you so much, both of you, for talking us through. I think I will first open it up to the group for questions. Actually, I'm going to ask one question first. Kate, you started to talk about the daily work, and can you talk about how much of it you feel like is technical, like that is, and both of you, how much of it is technical, i.e. similar to, high level considerations about indicators and analyses and evidence creation and kind of that side of it, and how much of it is managing projects more globally?
So I think it depends. I think it also depends on where you are in your career. When I got out of my PhD, I would say that 80 to 90% of my work was technical. I am specifically the technical director and not the project director for the project right now because I wanted to keep a technical lens. That said, I would say that 70 to 80% of my time is actually spent on management with a technical lens. Right? So my India colleagues had this fantastic term, and it was like, oh, we need a techno managerial person. And it's like, oh, what do you mean by that? And it really is that. It's somebody who knows programs, but understands programs from the technical point to be able to do that. And that's, I would say, is the bulk of what I do. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think I get to do more technical work than Lara does. It just depends. It depends on the project. It depends on the day, I think, too. But also, you know, and again, like, you know, I did probably more technical work 5 years ago, but as you get, you know, I do manage projects, but I do get to do more technical management, but also too, you know, at some point, you know, I love to run Stata. I love to sit in front of Law and Order and just run Stata, you know, or some other mindless show that just is on in the background, but I don't do that anymore. There are people that run Stata and I help specify the analysis or review what they've done or whatever. You know, so it just depends. There is a decent amount of management. But I work with a fabulous manager, Samya, who like manages me. And then, you know, she is very good at the management. So I do get I get a longer leash on the technical and I'd say it's, you know, a lot, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, like a lot of it too, it's technical, but it's also conceptual. Like we do a lot of conceptual thinking and then for those activities or for that stuff. And then, you know, if it's a good idea or sometimes when it's not, then it gets implemented or effectuated. You know, and we get to come along for the ride, but there's often a team doing that. And so there are different parts of people doing different technical things. Different people doing different technical things.
That's really helpful. Questions from the group?
Yeah, I had a question. Kate, you mentioned that when you left, like after your PhD and you were with IIP, when you left academia and went to work, I forget where specifically it was, but that there were some like differences between the type of work or the type of roles you were in. And I was curious if you guys could both comment kind of on what surprised you about that transition away from the academic setting into the roles you guys took at various organizations and kind of if there's any gained insights from like that transition that maybe you weren't expecting.
I mean, I think that you didn't have to work 12 plus hours a day in NGOs. And, you know, they're just, you know, you don't lose your job if you don't get the grants and cover your salary. That's someone else's job a lot of times. So that was a big difference. Again, I went to IntraHealth and I don't know if it was a surprise, but just the breadth of, I mean, and the breadth of stuff. And that was like after, you know, I worked for a year on a project or a big project, a big global flagship. And then just was doing, I mean, everything from nutrition, you know, child and women's nutrition to fistula to HIV to health system strengthening to human resources, like just the breadth of the portfolio. And I was like, that, you know, I wasn't happy because I couldn't do anything well because I mean, you can learn one new thing at a time, but you can't learn 5 new things at a time. And you need to really understand, in my opinion, to do a good job at monitoring, evaluation, implementation, research, whatever you call it, you need to understand the overall programming as well. And I think this is one of Melissa's questions. I think, you know, IIP is probably one of the more applied, you know, things here, or, you know, they do. But, you know, at NGOs, depending on the NGO, depending on what project you're on, it's also, there's a little bit more rapid return or it is more applied. So if you do some evidence generation or this or that, like you're not begging people to look and change something. You can kind of push that from inside as well, if that makes sense. So that's a big difference too. On good days, not every day is a good day, but you know, that is the idea of what we do.
Yeah. I guess I came at it from a slightly different perspective in that and my father having been an academic and having grown up in an academic household, I swore that I never wanted to be an academic. So there was that. And then learned once again that you should never say never, because chances are you're going to step into that in some way or another. Regardless of where I was, whether I was in academia or in the NGO world, I would say I'm certainly putting long hours
Yeah, that's true.
in the NGO world.
IntraHealth, I didn't say JSI, yeah, sorry.
I'm definitely putting long hours. And so the myth of a 9-to-5 job is the reality. I like it. There is no 9-to-5 job. I mean, in public health, I think that part of it is who we are and how the field itself is, that we're driven that way. I would also say that the need to be, echoing what Kate said, the need to be nimble and to be able to take what you've learned within one context and apply it into a different context is really something that is really important in the NGO world. I think you can become very comfortable at doing one thing and doing one thing really well in academia, and building a whole portfolio of work out of a specific topic. I was a pediatric HIV disclosure person, and I can actually say that like the work I did in that field is still like nascent. I could go back into that because people haven't advanced that work. That said, I've been able to use those skills and that understanding of the context in different settings. And that's one of the nice things for somebody who I think is a bit ADD like me. As I kept on saying, I've been pivoting. I've clearly gone around in a bunch of ways. It's an opportunity. My organization is a small NGO compared to a JSI or an FHI 360. FHI 360 is a juggernaut. I mean, like thousands of employees, as is JSI and Save the Children globally. So layoffs are less common, but the NGO world is not immune to that. And I think that that's there too. I think you learn to compromise, but I think we learn to compromise in all settings. And it's just, what are you choosing to compromise on?
Okay, I have 2 questions, but I'm thinking about which one to ask first. So this is great. Thank you so much. I think my first is maybe piggybacking off of Melissa's question. You know, it sort of seems as you go on in your career, you sort of have this mix of technical and management, and sometimes management seems to, as you grow, becomes more of a role. Did you find like early in your career that you really wanted to be in a management position? Or if you didn't, is it something that you ended up really enjoying, or things that you just, yeah, I guess it's something that a lot of us and early in our careers haven't really had the chance to do yet, and sort of your thoughts on that.
I'll start. I think that if you're a PI, you're a manager, right? You're going to have to manage your project. And I think that one of the things that we don't necessarily teach ourselves well is how to be a good manager. Nor do we really teach ourselves as evaluators, and I said this earlier, Chase, how to be a good facilitator. So those are really important skills, like knowing and understanding budgets, knowing and understanding management and managing people, and the importance of work plans, and understanding that context is really important, whether you end up in academia or in the NGO world or at WHO. Sooner or later, you're going to have to write a consultant contract. Sooner or later, you're going to have to prepare a budget. Sooner or later, you're going to have to write a report. And we ought to have those skills in our back pocket. Now, is that something we like to do? Some people really do like being managers, not me. But I ended up in a position where I started doing that really early because I had a portfolio that I needed to run. And that's where I would say in some ways it's the bossy big sister. I had to do some of that early.
I forget the question, but I hate management. And I'm not good at it. I mean, but I would say, but there are, I mean, and I left off, writing a consultant contract was also on my thing today and dealing with that. And, I left out some of those things that take up time and are part of what we do, But yeah, I would say too, and part of it, everything Lara said, and also like the PhD, I think, at JSI, we've been, I've been saying, or just in previous, I don't think we have current positions open, liking PhD because, what doing your PhD, you're managing yourself. I mean, quite honestly, you're managing your dissertation committee, right? Like you have to go and chase them down and we do the same thing. It's just not, they're not professors here, they're consultants or this or that. And you have to make decisions, right? And you learn how to kind of, and sometimes I think that's a more important skill set, or a PhD tells me you have that skill set versus what you did in your PhD, because you can learn like, you can learn about, I don't know, whatever whatever your PhD is about, you can learn that if you've done that kind of getting through those hoops and stuff, that's part of it. But yeah, I mean, yeah. And I mean, yeah. And I mean, even when I was out in Mali with Peter, I mean, I was looking at the budgets and I do like doing, but I hate doing budgets, but I think they're really important because one, you get, sorry, let me filter my language. There can be problems if your budget isn't right? You can't do good research if you don't budget for the right things. But also for me, it sometimes helps me think through, oh, I need to include this in the proposal or this or whatever, because I forgot it, but this is an important, and the budget kind of helps me think about all the moving, like a budget is the moving pieces, right? And how you have to pay to move the pieces, but then that's something that actually should be part and parcel of the work as well.
Did you want to?
No.
Other questions?
Yeah, Anju?
Thank you for being here today. So you've already touched a little on it, about what was different or surprising for you. But given both of your like wide and varied experiences, a lot of it sounds like, there's a common goal in the projects that you work on and stuff, but how do the different contexts and environment differ? And also, like, because of the nature of your setting where, there's consulting versus academia versus a nonprofit, like how do the work differ, like even like speed or like bureaucracies? I know that's everywhere. But how would you say those differ, or if there's other notable distinctions?
Conscious of time. I think the answer around context is that it depends. As a consultant, what you're consulting on, who you're consulting for, and where the funding is coming from and what the intended output, it all depends. It depends also on what the kind of the NGO you're working on. It all depends. It's really hard to be able to say, these are the three things. I think you need to, part of it of stepping into that space is thinking like a researcher and asking the questions, like figuring out what you know and what you don't know, and asking the questions about what you don't know in order to do it right. And that may be whether you're stepping into an academic environment, and every single academic institution is different, or whether you're stepping into an NGO, or you're working in a different country, or you're working with the UN organization, or you're talking to Kate versus talking to Melissa. Every single one of those things is going to be different.
Maybe I'll ask one last thing that was brought up by some of the SORT folks was how much flexibility do you have in an NGO and a sort of evaluation practice career to actually set your own agenda and to decide what you want to work on a regular basis?
And to your question too, I think, it depends. Again, it depends, but I'd say a consultant has the least flexibility because the scope of work is written and you either take it or you don't, right? Like, and academia has a lot more freedom, but you can do that if you get funded, right? So NGOs, you know, it depends on the donor. And certainly if you can, and JSI is probably bigger and a little bit more flexible than PRB. You know, if I can get Gates to pay for something, I can do it, right? But at JSI, getting Gates to pay for something is, you know, it's not an easy task. Within USAID projects, it depends, you know, it depends where you are in the structure and when you join the project and stuff. So if you're joining early or, you know, writing the proposal, you can write stuff in that you want, right? But if you're joining halfway through, less easy because there are work plans and you know, and there are different even mechanisms within USAID. There are contracts which you don't have as much flexibility. The projects we work on currently are called cooperative agreements, and there's more flexibility within that. So like we're going to be going into work planning, and so, you know, like I'll take the PEDS example. Like, you know, I'm interested again in child health. Experience of care is part of quality of care, and like our kids and moms treated respectfully and all this stuff kind of from the maternal respectful care. There's not been as much done in pediatrics. And so we wrote that, and I think that was my brainchild, if I'm not mistaken. And so we wrote that into our, you know, we proposed it. Laura didn't say no. We went, you know, as a technical director, you know, within our within our project. And so then, you know, we were able to do that, but it's not like I was able to do that like that. It's like we had this idea, pitched it to our project, then pitched it to USAID and convinced them. And so we have some work streams around that. So it just depends. But then there are other things like things that you need to do that you don't have any choice about at all, you know, that are just part of what you're doing. Or, you know, like Niger, like I could propose some new things. And if the Niger team thinks it's a good idea, we maybe could do it in Niger. But then I still have USAID, I mean, the Niger team does it, but you know, there are still like routine reporting and all these things that USAID wants that we can't say no. And so, you know, it depends.
Yeah, I think the other piece with the new business development, right? So as an NGO, you're constantly thinking about what can I, you know, what are ideas? And then also not just new ideas, but who might be interested in it. So thinking there are lots of opportunities if you have a good idea to think about how to craft that idea in order to then propose it to various partners or donors. So.
Which is not entirely unlike academia, right? Okay, so we are over time. There are a couple of questions that I wanted to ask, and maybe when we're circulating out in the hallway eating all of this delicious food, you guys can talk about it. And some of the things I think students wanted to know were what skills should they be getting, experiences should they be getting in their program now that would make them good for an evaluation career / NGO sort of career. And I'm not going to take our time to answer that, but if there's a possibility to discuss that with anybody who's interested in the hallway. And then finally, if you can talk when you're circulating about how people learn about opportunities with your organizations, that would be great. And before we close this part of the seminar series, I want to introduce Emily Gurley, who had a deadline earlier, but she's my compatriot here in the seminar series, and we'll be running some of these seminar series later on in the year. So thanks for coming and welcome. And I want to thank the speakers for their time and for giving us such a good time. We'll stop there and please go eat some food.
Yeah. Well, I